heartily welcome to the Herland Report.
Thank you.
We are here in America trying to understand what is going on in this culture at the moment. And we're here speaking to you, Mr. DeVon Johnson.
Thank you.
About Christianity, what went wrong in America,
Right.
Black Lives Matter,
Yes, ma'am.
White Lives Matter,
Yeah.
and what kind of values that would rebuild America, because I sure think that the hatred won't.
Yeah, hatred definitely won't. And I know, even with Black Lives Matter, I know it feels weird to see a race that is very angry. My people are upset with the way things are going here.
No wonder.
Yeah.
No wonder.
Yeah, and I'll say this, Black Lives Matter was not our ideal solution. What happens is that when a group of people become disenfranchised long enough, then what ends up happening is you will see them rise up for themselves. So you see this with the feminist movement, with Me Too, is that it's not ideal that this movement had to start, but because no one has said anything and no one has done anything who had the power to change it, we take matters into our own hands and we start movements. And that's what I love about movements, is that they start things and they keep going. And so even for Black Lives Matter, for me, who has grown up with just a history for my people of having to fight for rights and watching things, we just came out of Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, and watching certain things happen for social justice, you feel almost reminiscent that you're joining into a historical fight for your people. But then when you sit back and you sit down and realize, it breaks your heart that it's come to this, that we have to fight for rights. And you start asking yourself, man, like, what is the end goal of all this? And the bottom line for Me Too or Black Lives Matter is we want you to care about us as much as you care about yourself. For those who are in power and those who hold the authority and those who hold the power over our groups, we want you to care about us the way you care about yourself, which is one of the core elements of what Christ called us to do, is to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And I think that's where you're starting to see that. And now here's the problem with movements. There's a wonderful woman who's here in the Texas state named Beth Moore. And she said the problem with movements that are started by us is that these movements will go and they'll go to a certain point, but sometimes they will outpace God. And then you start seeing these movements turn into idols, where people start pushing and they start exalting the movement over the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter of Black Lives Matter is not just equality, but equity, that we all are on the same plane. That's really what it is. But when you start putting Black Lives Matter above everything else, then you start seeing hate speech towards other groups, and then you start seeing some real hateful action. You start seeing those things. And that's not true for everybody, but there are some people who idolize the movement, and then you lose the heart. When it's a movement of God, however, when you see revival in the church, or when you see some people like Jesus and his disciples enter into the place, the movement will go as far as God wants it, and then God will tarry there, and so will his people. And so you saw where Jesus would come in, and he would spend time with people, and sometimes he would stay there for a period of time to spend time with that matter. And I think that's where the church has missed it, is that the reason why these movements have come into existence is because when social injustice was happening, the church stayed silent. When these groups needed us the most, we said nothing. We preached, we kept talking about heaven, and for some churches they preached prosperity and they preached about all this change, but we did nothing. Here at Windsor, what I love about our pastor, Kirby John Caldwell, is that when he came into Houston, he grew up here, when he came back from New York, he looked at a bunch of disenfranchised people, and he became what was necessary for change. So he started instituting things they didn't have: healthcare, restaurants, housing, YMCA, schools. This is the job of the church, is to go into the places where people are feeling disenfranchised and become the change that they need. Could you imagine if every church in their neighborhood would become whatever was needed to heal the broken in that city? there would be no need for Black Lives Matter, because the church would be present with police forces and in political forums and making sure we stood up and gave a voice to the voiceless. But the church doesn't do that. We focus so much on heaven, we forget there's people who are living in hell on earth, and that's rough, you know?
So is it really Christian hypocrisy and the lack of love for one's, for really, the lack of empathy, the lack of respect too?
Yeah.
Respect is such a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
The respect for diversity, the respect for God having created us different,
yes.
because he doesn't want only the color red.
Uh-huh.
He wants the spread,
Right.
and we can see that in nature too.
Yeah.
It's not only one type of trees or one type of birds.
Yeah.
These currents we see in society today, it's like they're trying to assimilate us so we all become, what they want us to be, let's say,
yeah.
with one opinion, either like, and not respecting the diversity, not respecting the Muslims, not respecting the Jews, not that whole diversity. Would you say that group like Black Lives Matter really comes out of the lack of Christian engagement and the hypocrisy, really, in the rest of America?
Yeah, I would say so. And most people wouldn't place it on the church, but this is why I do. It's impossible for me to ask somebody who does not know God, who is love, to be love for a disenfranchised people. The only people who I believe can really do that are people who've had an encounter with God. Until you've received love, I don't know how you can give it. So if there's any group of people who should be setting the standard for that, it should be us. And so that's why you're seeing a split in churches right now. We talked a little bit off camera about Lecrae and his fight for equality, and he's had to make a decision with an audience that was more considered white evangelical, and really stand up for his people. Now, that it doesn't look good for us on the inside so much, but it was almost necessary to have to say something, because it was almost as if it was the same problem Martin Luther King had. So Martin Luther King writes a letter from the Birmingham jail, one of his most famous things he did. I would consider almost more impactful than the I Have a Dream speech, because he's sitting in jail and he begins to write a letter. But he doesn't write it to the people who put him in jail, doesn't write it to the racist. He doesn't even write it to the atheist who doesn't believe in the God that he does. He writes it to the white pastors of his religion. And he starts talking to them about how much he needs their voice. He starts questioning, like, why aren't you saying anything? And you start feeling that again now. The difference is Martin Luther King was in a jail and had a pen. Lecrae has a microphone in a studio. And so you start seeing the same message being pumped over and over again. But how do we keep ending up at this place where the church does not stand up for those who are disenfranchised? Why are we keep staying there? And I really think it's because a lot of people have mastered church without God. There are people who can literally go to church and live their lives and have no encounter with God. They just go through the motions. That's not Christ. That's not Jesus at all. Jesus spent as much time with the people as he did in prayer. He spent plenty of time in prayer, but he spent plenty of time with people. So the question is that if you sat down with a disenfranchised person for a period of time, would you walk away from that encounter the same way you would from walking away if you just went to church every Sunday? And the answer is no. If you went to church with just all of your people and you sat and you knew the same people all the time and you sat in church and you left, you'd feel one way. But if you spent time with the other side, the people who don't have gas money to get to church, and you sat and heard their stories and why they say and do and feel the way they feel, you wouldn't walk away the same. And that's the balance of Christianity. It's that there's one side that's hurting and one side that's doing well. Let's balance the scale, says Jesus. So that's kind of on us for not doing that.
It's very interesting that you're mentioning Lecrae, and I always say I really love Kendrick Lamar. Mm-hmm. I respect him so much because these are the guys that are out there in culture and influencing millions, not only here in America, But in Europe and worldwide, I mean, this is the music the young people listen to in the Middle East and in the probably, well, also the Far East, but Africa, wherever.
Yeah.
And I admire them very much for being out there in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And actually doing what one may say Jesus also did. He was quite a revolutionary. Some people call him a communist, Jesus really, because he cared for the poor and he was out there. And the people that criticized him were like the posh, Pharisees, that knew the Bible and everything, but didn't have any compassion. I respect these guys that are trying to give out a message, and the great poets of our time, I do believe. Some of these rappers are, especially the ones that are really trying to address it and hailing a new way of acting, rather than just going with the 50 cents, the club and the ladies and all of that. Of course, we have that too, and hailing the drugs and just me on top of a car and this is my car and these are my 7 ladies and all that stupid. I'm not talking about those rappers.
No.
But I'm talking about the ones that are analyzing society, like Kendrick Lamar and Lecrae and many others do. Most deaf. There are people that really do it very well.
All the way.
So it's a strange thing to me too, because in American Christian world, many also say that I can't talk to those because they don't belong to my group. It's directly contrary to how we saw Jesus live.
All the way. And that's funny because Lecrae had that issue. There's Lecrae and there's Sho Baraka and Jackie Hill and Propaganda. There's a lot of guys who are doing this quality music, and they all love the Kendrick Lamars and the Mos Def. And if you sit down and talk with them, they talk about the influence that those people had. And I mean, in fact, Lecrae does a mixtape probably once a year, and he includes secular artists on this, on his records.
Well, he should.
Yeah, as he should. And the reason why is because our generation wants to know that you see us. And so when the church says nothing, you have a Kendrick Lamar who comes out of a city that has a bunch of disenfranchised people, and he says something that strikes to the heart, that means something. Like, I can go to the club anytime I want, but when I get done with the club, I'm still going back to a place. I'm still scared to drive home because I'm scared I'm gonna get pulled over by a police officer and not make it home. I'm still afraid that there's drugs being sold in my apartment complex, and I got to figure out how I'm going to pay. Like, these are real issues, and Kendrick, he addresses those issues. Now, the hard part for the church is we get upset that Kendrick says those things in his vernacular and language. So there's curse words in it, and there's obviously the way he says certain things, we hate it, but we're missing the core content. He's saying the things that we wouldn't. And so you have someone like Lecrae who appreciates the message, and he joins forces and says, hey man, listen, I'm about Jesus and I hear your message. Let's find a way that we can cause change. And you may not believe in God the way I believe in God, but we can definitely help people and we can find that common ground. And so Tupac Shakur, and you find a lot of these people who are long lasting, okay? The people who do club music do not last long. They don't last long. They have to find either other genres or they just die off. They call them one-hit wonders. But the people who last in the hip hop realm, or the people who even last like a Lecrae, if their message does not address what this current generation cares about, then they'll fall off. And so they find themselves attaching themselves to the heart of the people. That's what they care about. And the one group that does not do that is the church. And when I use that as a blanket statement, there are plenty of churches who are, but the overall image and perception is that we don't. And so that's bad. It's really bad. And so I appreciate a Kendrick who will speak up. Do I listen to Kendrick as much as I can? There's a certain point that I have to stop, right? For me, this is just for me. But if someone told me to listen to Kendrick, I'm not mad at them. I'm not mad at them for that. In fact, I want to know what do you feel? Like, what are you feeling when you come away from that? Like what can we do to help you garner change? What is his words impacting you with, and what can we do to help that impact, influence, change in you and in your community? That's what the church should be asking.
Thank you very much, DeVon Johnson, for taking the time to speak to us about these most pressing matters.
Yes, ma'am.
And thank you for joining us here at the Herland Report, and we hope for sure to have you on for another program.
I hope to be there. I hope to be a part. Thank you.